I came back from work to see a sold sign on my house. You don't need a luxury home at your age, my stepfather smirked, packing for his VIP European tour. I let him board his flight, but when he returned he had no place to go. I'm not even sure where to start, but since this is Reddit, I'll keep it simple. I came back from a business trip today to find a sold sign on my front lawn. My stepfather smirked and told me I don't need a luxury home as he packed for his VIP European tour. But I let him board his flight, and when he returned he had nowhere to go. Before I explain how that happened, let me introduce myself. My name is Ethan. I'm 28 years old, and I work as a structural engineer. My job pays well, but it's exhausting. I spend more time on site than at home, traveling between projects. The one thing that kept me sane was my house, my own place, or so I thought, because as of today, my house no longer belongs to me. You don't need a house like this, kid. I knew something was off the second I turned onto my street. I'd just gotten back from a 3-week business trip out of state. I was exhausted, running on 3 hours of airplane sleep, and just wanted to take a shower and crash on my couch. But as I pulled up to my house, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A bright red and white sold sign stuck into my front lawn. I slammed on the brake so hard my tires screeched. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. No, that had to be a mistake. I pulled into the driveway and practically ran to the front door, my work bag still slung over my shoulder. But before I could get inside, I heard his voice. Richard, my stepfather. He was inside my house packing up my things. I stormed through the front door, hard hammering. What is going on? Richard barely looked up from sealing a box with packing tape. Oh hey kiddo, you're back earlier than I thought. Kiddo, he always called me that. Like I was still some clueless teenager and not a grown man who had worked for everything he had. I dropped my bag onto the floor. Why is there a sold sign on my lawn? Richard let out a dramatic sigh like I was the one inconveniencing him. We sold it. My stomach twisted. We? I took a step closer. What do you mean we? Richard set down the tape and looked at me like I was being slow. Your mother and I, obviously. You don't need a big house like this, Ethan. It's ridiculous for someone your age. You should be renting a small apartment, saving money. He waved a hand. You'll thank me later. I felt my fingers curl into fists. Richard, this is my house. I bought it with my money. You had no right. He laughed. Kid, you think you did this alone? You think you're some self-made success story? He clapped me on the shoulder like I was a child. It's all family money. Shared assets. You don't actually own anything. I recoiled like he'd slapped me. Family money, shared assets? No, that was a lie. How they stole my house. Here's where things get technical. Yes, I paid for the house, yes. I made every mortgage payment. But the house was originally bought when I was 23, too young to get a good loan on my own. My credit was solid, but the bank still required a cosigner. And my mother? She volunteered my stepfather. It's just paperwork, Ethan, she had said at the time, waving away my concerns. It'll still be your house. So I signed the documents believing my name was on the deed. And it was at first. What I didn't know was that Richard had refinanced the mortgage behind my back while I was away. My name was quietly removed from the deed months ago. The house was now solely in his name, and legally he had every right to sell it. I felt sick. How my voice caught in my throat. Richard smirked. Oh, don't look so surprised. You signed the paperwork years ago. You should really read the fine print, kiddo. My hands were shaking. Where is Mom? Richard shrugged. Already in Italy. Needed a little break. I gritted my teeth. So you sold my house, took the money, and left me with what exactly? Oh, don't be so dramatic. He smirked, patting my cheek like I was a toddler. You're young. You'll figure it out. But I had a plan. Richard zipped up a sleek leather suitcase and slung it over his shoulder. Listen, I'd love to stay and chat, but I've got a flight to catch. 5-star hotels, private tours, the works, first class all the way. I just stared at him. He walked past me toward the front door. I'll bring you back a nice souvenir. Yeah? And then he was gone. I stood there staring at the empty space where my furniture used to be. My home, my entire life had just been stolen from me, and I couldn't do a single thing about it. Or at least, that's what Richard thought. I let him board his flight. I let him sip champagne at 30,000 feet thinking he'd won. But when he landed back home 2 weeks later, he realized something. He had nowhere to go. So where was I? Oh right, my house was gone. My stepfather was sipping champagne in first class, and I was standing in the ruins of my old life trying to keep myself from punching a hole in the wall. But I wasn't going to lose my mind. I was going to get even. Ethan, you have to see the bigger picture. The first thing I did was call my mother. No answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. By the third call, I was shaking with rage. Not just because she wasn't picking up, but because she already knew. She had known for weeks, maybe even months, and she hadn't warned me. I texted her, Mom, call me now. 3 dots appeared. She was typing. Then the message popped up. Mom, I don't want to do this over the phone. We'll talk when I'm back. I stared at the screen. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. She wanted to wait? After they had sold my house out from under me, I called again. This time she picked up. Ethan, I really don't appreciate the tone of your messages. Her voice was calm, detached, like I was the one overreacting. I gripped my phone so tightly my fingers ached. You don't appreciate my tone? I repeated, laughing bitterly. Mom, are you out of your mind? You sold my house. She sighed, like I was being difficult. Ethan, sweetheart, Richard and I talked about this, and we really think this is for the best. I nearly dropped the phone. For the best? For who? For you, she insisted. Honey, you have to admit, a house like that was just too much for you. It's expensive, big, a lot of responsibility. You work so much you barely have time to enjoy it. What's the point of throwing money into a place you don't even use? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom, I bought that house. I wanted that responsibility. She'd get, Ethan, you're still young. You don't need a massive house at this stage of your life. Richard and I found a much better option for you. A modern little condo right in the city. It's low maintenance, affordable, much more suitable. I was speechless. A condo? You stole my house and now you're trying to convince me to settle for a condo? She sighed like I was being a child. Sweetheart, you have to see the bigger picture. Richard really helped you here. He freed you from all that stress. And listen, we didn't just take everything. A portion of the money will go toward helping you get that condo. Richard will handle the details once we're back. My stomach turned. And the rest? There was a pause. Then she said, well, a little went toward our trip. But Ethan, come on. It's all family money. We all deserve a little happiness, don't we? I felt like I was going to be sick. She actually believed this. She actually thought they had done me a favor. Legally, he had every right. I spent the next 2 hours going through my paperwork, desperate to find some way to fight this. There had to be something, some legal loophole, some document that would prove that the house was still mine. But when I got to the refinancing papers, my stomach turned to stone because there it was in black and white. Months ago, while I had been working out of state, Richard had refinanced the mortgage in his name only. My name had been removed from the deed, making him the sole owner. He had done it so quietly, so strategically that by the time I even realized what had happened, it was already too late. I read the fine print 3 times, hoping I had missed something, but I hadn't. Legally, he had every right to sell my home. The money was already gone. My next move was to check my bank accounts. I knew I hadn't seen any money from the sale, but I needed to be sure. When I opened the banking app, my hands started to shake because I saw exactly what I feared. A $490,000 deposit from the home sale, followed by multiple withdrawals, hotel bookings, luxury brands. A wire transfer to an international account. I felt like I was going to be sick. The money wasn't just gone, it had already been spent, but I wasn't done yet. I sat in my empty house staring at my phone, feeling rage build up in my chest. Richard thought he had won, but I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I took a deep breath, steadied my hands and made 2 phone calls. The first? My lawyer. The second? My Uncle David. See, Richard had forgotten one thing. The only reason he had credit to refinance the house was because of my mother. And I knew something she didn't want him to know. Richard was about to lose everything. Let him enjoy his European tour. Let him sip champagne and think he had gotten away with it. Because when he landed back home, there wouldn't be a single penny left in his name. And he was about to learn exactly what it felt like to have everything taken away from you. Alright, Reddit, time for the fun part. Richard thought he had pulled off the perfect scam. He took my house, spent the money and jetted off to Europe, all while patting himself on the back for helping me. But what he didn't know was that he had left behind just enough loose ends for me to unravel his entire life. So while he was sipping overpriced wine in Paris, I was setting the stage for his downfall. Step 1. Freeze everything. The first call I made was to my lawyer Sam. I'd known Sam since college. He wasn't some big-shot attorney, but he was incredibly sharp. And more importantly, he hated guys like Richard. After explaining everything, Sam let out a low whistle. Jesus, Ethan. He really screwed you over. No kidding, I muttered, pacing my empty living room. Tell me there's something I can do. Well, legally, yeah. He had the right to sell the house. My stomach sank. But, Sam continued, his voice darkening, if he refinanced the mortgage without your knowledge, we might have something. That got my attention. How? Because your name was originally on the deed, Sam explained. If Richard committed fraud to remove you, falsified signatures, withheld documents, then we can hit him with a lawsuit. I clenched my fist. Can we prove that? That's what I'm gonna find out. Sam assured me he'd pull all the records and see if Richard had broken any laws in the refinancing process. If he had, I could drag him into court, freeze his assets and make his life a complete nightmare. But that wasn't my only move. Step 2, burn his bridges. Next, I called my Uncle David. Uncle David is my mom's older brother. He hates Richard. He saw through his fake charm years ago, but my mom ignored his warnings and married the guy anyway. The moment I told him what happened, David went ballistic. That manipulator, are you kidding me? He stole your house. Oh, it gets better, I said. He used Mom's credit to refinance. I'm pretty sure she doesn't even know how deep she is in this. David cursed under his breath. What do you need from me? David owns a small accounting firm, and lucky for me, Richard has been using his services for years. He trusted my uncle to handle his taxes, business filings, everything. And now, David was more than happy to dig through Richard's financials. If there's anything shady in his books, I'll find it, David promised. And if he's evading taxes, he's gonna have bigger problems than you. I grinned. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Step 3. The final blow. For the next 2 weeks, I kept my head down and waited. I stayed completely silent. Didn't call my mother, didn't send any messages to Richard. Let him think everything was fine. Meanwhile, Sam dug into the mortgage paperwork, and David poured through Richard's finances. And then just 3 days before Richard was set to fly back home, I got 2 phone calls. The first was from Sam. Bingo, he said. Richard committed mortgage fraud. Apparently, Richard had forged my signature on some documents to push through the refinancing without my consent. That meant his entire sale of the house was illegal, which meant I could sue his ass off. Send me everything, I told Sam. We're bringing him down. Then an hour later, David called. You're gonna love this, he said, almost laughing. I found undisclosed income in Richard's tax filings. I perked up. What kind of income? Let's just say he's been hiding money from the IRS for years, hundreds of thousands in under-the-table cash, all unreported. If I make the right phone calls, he's gonna have a serious audit on his hands. I felt a slow, cold smile creep onto my face. Make the calls. Gladly. Richard had taken everything from me. No, I was taking everything from him. Richard lands back home and learns he's screwed. Richard's flight landed at 4:15 p.m. on a Sunday. At 4:37 p.m., I was sitting in my car across the street from his house waiting. I didn't have to wait long. A black Uber SUV pulled up, and out stepped Richard, dressed in a designer coat and looking smug as ever. I watched as he rolled his suitcase up the driveway, humming to himself. And then he reached the front door, punched in the key code, and nothing happened. Richard frowned and tried again. Still nothing. Then the door swung open and there stood my mother. And she did not look happy. Even from across the street I could hear their voices. What, Linda? Why is the code not working? My mother folded her arms. We need to talk. Richard tried to step inside, but she blocked the doorway. Not out here. Just let me in. Richard, she said, her voice suddenly trembling. The bank froze our accounts. His expression changed instantly. What? I don't know what happened, she cried. Everything was fine. And then this morning I tried to withdraw money, and they said the account was locked. Richard's face turned pale, very, very pale. Then his phone rang. He answered, stepping away from my mom, and that's when I saw it. His entire body stiffened. He started yelling into the phone. I knew exactly who he was talking to because the IRS audit notice had just landed in his inbox. His tax fraud had just been exposed. His illegal mortgage had just been flagged. His entire financial life had just collapsed, and he had no idea who did it. I drove away smiling. I could have stayed and watched. I could have walked up to Richard, stared him dead in the eyes and told him exactly what I had done, but I didn't because the best revenge is letting him realize all on his own that he lost. I lost my house, but Richard, he just lost everything. All right, Reddit. Buckle up because this is where it gets really good. Last time, Richard landed back home only to find his bank accounts frozen, his tax fraud exposed, and my mother blocking him from entering their house. He had no idea what was happening, only that his entire financial life was crumbling around him. But that was just the beginning because now it was time to watch him drown. Who did this? I didn't stick around to watch Richard lose his mind in real time. Instead, I drove home, made myself a drink, and waited for the inevitable call from my mother. It didn't take long. At exactly 6:42 p.m., my phone lit up with her name. I let it ring, then ring again and again. Finally, I picked up. Mom. Her voice was shaking. Ethan, do you know what's happening? I leaned back in my chair, sipping my whiskey. Depends. What's wrong? She let out a panicked breath. Richard's accounts are frozen. The IRS is investigating him for tax fraud, and the mortgage company is saying there's a legal dispute over the sale of your house. I pretended to be shocked. Well, sounds like he's having a really bad day. Ethan, she snapped. This isn't funny. Did you do something? I let the silence stretch. Then I said very calmly, you and Richard stole my house. She flinched. I could hear it in the way she exhaled sharply. Sweetheart, she started, her voice softening. You have to understand. We were thinking about your future. The house was just too much responsibility for you. I laughed, low and dark. Responsibility? That's your excuse? You stole everything from me, and now you're upset that Richard is facing consequences. Ethan, she whispered, he's going to lose everything. I smiled. Good. There was a sharp intake of breath. You don't mean that? Oh, I do, I said. Because guess what, Mom? He's not the only one losing everything. Richard had nowhere to go. I found out what happened next from Uncle David, who had front row seats to the meltdown of the century. After hanging up on my mother, I texted David. Me, how bad is it? David, bad. David, Richard tried to take money out of one of his business accounts. Frozen. David, tried to call his tax guy. Found out the IRS is auditing him. Panicked. David, then he tried to get into the house. And Mom. Me, what? David, Mom kicked him out. I sat up straight. Mom kicked him out? Me, you're kidding. David, nope, she's freaking out. She doesn't want to get caught in his mess. So she locked him out and told him to fix his own problems. Me, where is he now? David, no clue. But if I had to guess, he's sleeping in his car. I couldn't stop grinning. Richard had spent the last 10 years lording over me, treating me like some stupid kid who needed his guidance. And now he was homeless. Ethan, please, we need your help. A day passed, then another. On the third day my phone rang again. Mom, I let it ring, then ring again. Then finally I answered. Mom. Her voice was strained. Ethan, we need to talk. I set my drink down. About what? She hesitated. Then, he's in trouble. He has nowhere to go. He's sleeping in a motel, but I laughed. Oh no, not a motel. How tragic. Ethan, she pleaded. Please, we need your help. I leaned forward. You need my help? You mean the same child who wasn't ready for the responsibility of owning a house? The same guy you stole from? Sweetheart, where's the money, Mom? I cut her off. Where's the money from the house? Silence. Then quietly, it's gone. I closed my eyes, feeling a deep, satisfied burn in my chest. Of course it was. They had spent it all. First-class flights, luxury hotels, shopping sprees in Paris and Rome. They had burned through nearly $500,000 in weeks. And now they had nothing. I took a slow breath. Let me get this straight. You stole my house, sold it, blew the money, and now that Richard is homeless, you expect me to fix it. Her voice cracked. We made a mistake. I smiled. Yes, you did. Then I hung up. Richard finally breaks. That should have been the end of it. But Richard? He wasn't done yet. That night at exactly 11:47 p.m., I heard a knock on my door. I checked the peephole and there he was, Richard. His usually slicked back hair was a mess. His suit was wrinkled. His eyes bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I opened the door just enough to lean against the frame. Richard. He let out a shaky breath. Ethan. Listen. I know. I cut him off. Whatever you're about to ask. No. His jaw tightened. I just need some time. A place to stay while I laughed right in his face. He flinched. Then very slowly I leaned in and whispered, this isn't your home anymore. I watched his face twist, anger, shame, desperation, all flashing at once. You selfish child. I stepped back and slammed the door in his face. He pounded on it. Ethan, you selfish person. I locked the deadbolt and then I walked away. His shouting faded as I grabbed a beer, sat on my couch and turned on the TV. Richard was done and I had one. All right, read it? This is it, the final part. Richard had lost everything. His bank accounts frozen, his tax fraud exposed, his wife locked him out, his reputation destroyed. And now he was standing outside my door begging for help like a fool who played himself. So how did it all finally end? Well, it was even better than I expected. The last desperate move. After I slammed the door in Richard's face, I expected him to leave. He didn't. Instead, he started pounding on the door, his voice shaking with rage. Ethan, you arrogant man. You think this is funny? Let me in. I took another sip of my beer. Calm, unbothered. You're wasting your energy, Richard, I called out. You should be saving it for when the IRS starts knocking. Silence. Then boom. He banged on the door. Let me in. You never appreciate anything, do you? I sighed. Then without another word I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Yeah. Hi, I said casually. There's a man outside my house trying to break in. He's screaming threats. No, he doesn't live here. Yes, I'd like someone to come get him. I peeked out the window just in time to see Richard stumbling back from the door, looking around wildly. He was probably realizing he was about 5 minutes away from getting arrested. He muttered something under his breath, then took off down the street like a defeated man. And that was the last time I saw him in person. The final blow. In the following weeks, Richard's life collapsed completely. The IRS audit went through. Not only did they uncover years of tax evasion, but they also found undisclosed overseas accounts, which triggered a full-blown federal investigation. The fraud case moved forward. My lawyer Sam tore Richard apart in legal filings. Turns out forging someone's name on a mortgage document? That's highly illegal. My mother filed for divorce. Yep, the moment she realized Richard was dragging her down with him, she jumped ship, froze their shared accounts, hired her own lawyer, and kicked him out for good. I'd love to say she did it because she finally grew a conscience, but no, she did it because she was scared. I wasn't mad about it. In fact, it was perfect because now, Richard had nowhere to go. Where is Richard now? Here's the best part. I hadn't heard anything about Richard for months. But then a few weeks ago, I ran into Uncle David at a coffee shop. We sat down, caught up, and then I finally asked, "So where did Richard end up?" David grinned. "You're gonna love this. Turns out, after Richard lost everything, he tried to flee the country. Yeah, he actually booked a flight and tried to disappear, but there was one small problem. The IRS had already flagged his passport, so when he tried to board the plane, they arrested him at the airport." I nearly choked on my coffee. "You're serious?" David laughed. "Dead serious. Last I heard, he's trying to fight the charges, but between the fraud case, the tax evasion, and the debts, he's screwed." I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly. It was over. Richard was done. And as for me, well, I got my money back. Not all of it, of course. The house was gone. But between the lawsuit settlement and damages, I walked away with a very nice chunk of change. And my mother? She tried to apologize, sent long, guilt-ridden texts, left voicemails about how she had made a mistake and wanted to fix things, but I never responded because I realized something. She was never really on my side. She had stood by Richard until it was no longer convenient. And me? I was just collateral damage, so I cut her off. For the first time in my life, I had no family obligations. No guilt, no weight dragging me down, just freedom. And well, did it feel good. Final thoughts. A few months ago, I was homeless and betrayed. Now, I have a new place, a fresh start, a bank account full of Richard's money. And best of all, I sleep like a baby every night because I know somewhere out there, Richard is lying awake in a prison cell wondering where it all went wrong. And that's the sweetest revenge of all.
After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind, or maybe it has brought back some old memories. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories, and they connect all of us. Everyone has their own unique journey in life, and we all try to understand the world in our own way. These kinds of moments remind us that we are all human, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, and always learning something new. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it with your friends. Your thoughts and feedback are always valuable to us, as they motivate us to create even better content. Every story has its own unique angle, and our goal is to understand everyone's perspective and make our content diverse and relatable. Stories like these help us realize that life's journey is different for everyone, and by hearing other stories, we learn something new. You can also share your own stories with us. Your experiences are valuable to us as well, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave your feedback. We aim to create content that brightens your mind and gives you new ideas every time. If you've already seen this video before, your feedback is still important. With every piece of feedback, we can improve our content and bring a new perspective to our viewers. Today, what we saw was just a small part of the many stories shared on Reddit and across the world. It's a reminder of how we all try to understand life by sharing our experiences with each other. This video was only an example of how we try to connect with others through storytelling, learning about different sides of life. We hope to continue sharing such stories that help us all learn and grow together. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon. If you haven't already, please like and follow for more amazing content. Your support keeps us going, and we will strive to bring you more thought-provoking and heartwarming stories. Until next time, take care and stay curious. *.